Dr. Kate Grantham, the founder and executive director of fdev Consulting. At fdev, we provide organizations and governments with feminist research, evaluation, and analysis services. As a consultant, it's often my job to help clients get their research and messaging in front of different audiences, whether that's policymakers, practitioners, donors, or other researchers. The process of taking research findings and making them relevant and actionable for different audiences is called knowledge translation. The primary purpose of knowledge translation is to bridge the knowledge-action gap, ensuring that information reaches and influences those who can actually put it to use. For members of the Research Network on Women, Peace, and Security, target audiences might include policymakers in government, international organizations, civil society and women's rights groups, and other academics or practitioners working on women, peace, and security issues. Ultimately, knowledge translation helps to promote the uptake and use of research to support evidence-based policies, programs, and decision-making. Sometimes called knowledge synthesis or knowledge mobilization, having a well-defined knowledge strategy in place is not just good research practice, but also increasingly a requirement of donors and research funders. A key aspect of knowledge translation is thinking through which types of research outputs are the most relevant, accessible, and appropriate for different audiences. There are so many options available. How to pick which type of research output to develop really depends on your target audience. For example, academic publications like journal articles and book chapters cater primarily to other researchers, whereas popular media such as blog posts and op-eds, along with creative works like poster campaigns and videos, are particularly effective for engaging community members, making complex research findings more accessible and compelling. A policy brief is another type of research output, specifically a concise, targeted document that distills complex research and analysis into clear, actionable insights and recommendations for policymakers. If you've never written a policy brief before, think of it as a communication tool that's specifically designed to share your research results and recommendations with policymakers, helping them to develop, introduce, expand, or enhance policies. But why write a policy brief? Policy briefs are an effective tool for communicating with policymakers and shaping policy agendas. This is because policy briefs are first and foremost concise. Policy briefs are short, focused documents that present key information in a clear and concise manner. Policymakers often have limited time, so they appreciate the brevity of a policy brief, which allows them to grasp the most essential points quickly. Second, policy briefs are targeted. They're designed to address specific issues or questions that are directly relevant to policymakers. They provide targeted analysis and messaging, making them more likely to resonate with the policy audience. They're also impactful. Policy briefs distill complex research findings into clear, actionable insights and recommendations for policymakers, increasing their impact and use for decision-making. Finally, a key benefit of policy briefs is their accessibility. Policymakers are not necessarily technical specialists, so policy briefs use simple, clear language to ensure that information is easily understood and actionable. Moreover, unlike articles in journals or other academic publications, which often require special access through libraries or paid subscriptions, policy briefs are freely available to policymakers online, helping to ensure their broad reach and accessibility. And this is so important. I really can't stress this enough. If you only publish in academic spaces, your work will not reach policymakers. You have to meet them where they're at in terms of their access to information, their information-seeking habits, and their existing level of knowledge. That's why policy briefs are such an effective tool. How to write a policy brief. Key elements of an effective policy brief are purpose, audience, content, structure, design, and dissemination. Let's go through each element briefly, and I'll provide some examples along the way. Purpose. A policy brief should inform readers about a particular topic or issue, suggest possible policy options, and make recommendations. Clearly state your purpose up front and maintain a focused analysis and argument. Because policy briefs are usually short and to the point, it's important to avoid discussing information that isn't directly related to the main topic or issue. Stick to the essential details that support your main message or recommendations. A convincing policy brief should communicate the urgency of the issue and focus on the benefits and advantages of following your policy recommendations. Audience. The main audience for policy briefs is often policymakers in government, but can also include policymakers in other types of organizations. Before you start writing, identify your target audience. Consider their interest in and level of knowledge on the issue and what information they need to make an informed decision. Be as specific as possible in identifying your target audience. For policymakers in government, for example, consider the specific department, agency, or even the specific individual that you want to reach. For work on women, peace, and security, this might include staff or policymakers in departments of defense, security, foreign affairs, or gender equality. It might also include specific ambassadors, ministers, or other senior government officials. The more you know about your target audience, the more you can tailor your information and dissemination strategy to that audience. In any case, as mentioned, keep in mind that policymakers are invested in the issue, but they may not have in-depth technical knowledge. When writing your policy brief, it can sometimes help to imagine that you're explaining the issue to an informed friend, rather than a colleague who works in the same field. Content. The most effective policy briefs are clear, succinct, and focus on a single topic or policy issue. While there is no one-size-fits-all approach, policy briefs are typically 2 to 3 pages in length, but should be no more than 5 pages max. Policymakers are busy and they need to digest information quickly. Write in plain language, use fewer words, short sentences, and avoid technical jargon to make your research easy to understand. Be clear about your objectives and include only the most relevant information for your audience. Avoid spending too much space on your research methodology or on things like a literature review. More information on that can always be requested by readers. Highlight compelling statistics and interesting examples or case studies that readers will remember, but try not to overload them with information. It's helpful to date your work and also include contact details in case readers want more information or maybe even a follow-up meeting. Structure. The structure of your policy brief should lead the reader from problem to solution. Use logical structure to help readers understand the issue. Summarize key points at the start and use descriptive headings to guide your readers through your content. Some common sections of a policy brief include a descriptive title that catches the reader's attention, a brief overview or statement summarizing the main message of the brief, including the policy issue and high-level recommendations. This summary provides a quick snapshot for busy readers. It's one of the most important parts of a policy brief because it's the most frequently read and cited part of the entire publication. An introduction including background information on the issue, its significance and policy relevance. This sets the stage for the analysis that follows. A clear and detailed description of the issue or problem being addressed. This section explains why the issue is important and requires attention or action. Research analysis and findings, including relevant data and evidence. Often research findings are organized into a list to make them more easily digestible, with headline findings in bold, followed by more detailed explanation. Finally, clear, actionable recommendations based on your analysis and research findings. Outline what steps or actions should be taken to address the issue effectively. Be as specific as possible when generating recommendations, and try to indicate the target audience for your recommendations to increase accountability and action. Here is an example of a policy brief that I worked on a couple of years ago. It was produced as part of the Growth and Economic Opportunities for Women Research Series, a partnership between McGill University and the International Development Research Center. A couple of features that I want to highlight here. First, on the right-hand side of the brief, on the first page, is a bulleted list of key research results, which I've circled in orange. This draws readers' attention right away, letting them know the main findings of the research quickly. Second, circled in yellow, is a short statement summarizing the policy issue and main messages of the brief. On the second page of the brief, circled in purple, is the research approach, which you'll note is limited to just 2 paragraphs. As I mentioned, policymakers are less interested than other researchers in research methodology and approach. On the third page shown here, in bold red text, is policy insights. Note that the headline findings are also in bold, followed by a longer explanation and evidence. This allows readers to quickly grasp the key policy takeaways while also providing them with a more detailed explanation if they want to dive deeper. Design is another key element of an effective policy brief. A policy brief should be interesting and engaging to read. Use sidebars and bulleted lists to pull out key findings and recommendations. Use diagrams, figures, or data visualizations to make information more engaging. Include pull-out boxes for extra information that doesn't fit within the main text, such as definitions, policies, or case studies, and provide links where readers can find more detailed information if they'd like to. The final product should look clean, polished, and professional. If you're working with an organization or partners, they may have a policy brief template that you can use to develop yours. Otherwise, you can create your own policy brief using free tools like Canva or paid applications like Adobe. If you don't know where to start, look for examples of other organizations' policy briefs for design inspiration. Start with organizations that work on the same types of issues that you do and are likely targeting a similar audience. Also be sure to include the logos and websites of any institutions and partner organizations. Here is another example of a policy brief that I worked on 2 years ago for Oxfam Canada and Oxfam India. This brief is structured similarly to the previous example, with a bulleted list of key research results and a short statement summarizing the policy issues and main messages of the brief up front on the first page. Once again, the section on research approach is short, limited to just a single paragraph in this case, and this was for a multi-country, multi-year, multi-million-dollar project, so if they can summarize their approach in one paragraph, I promise that you can too. Although lots of links are also included in the footnotes for readers to find more information about the research process, methodology, and findings. From a design perspective, I love the use of color and illustration in this brief. Something else I really like is that the recommendations are organized and targeted to different policymakers, including specific recommendations for those in government, healthcare service providers, and civil society. This brief also takes a lot of care and space to properly acknowledge all of the partners and contributors, both through an acknowledgement section and by providing their logos. On the bottom of the last page, circled in yellow, is the contact information for key staff members at Oxfam Canada and Oxfam India, so that readers, policymakers, can follow up for more information or maybe even to schedule a meeting. Dissemination. Dissemination is the final step in the policy brief process, and it's often the least understood and discussed aspect. You can distribute your own policy brief by posting it on your organization's website, or if you're not affiliated with an organization, on your own personal website, sharing it on social media platforms like Twitter or LinkedIn to reach a wider audience and engage with followers. In this case, use relevant hashtags and tag key stakeholders to increase the visibility of your post, and consider developing an accompanying social media graphic to help with promotion. Also, circulate your policy brief to colleagues, research networks, and relevant listservs to amplify your work. Maybe even send the brief directly to those agencies, organizations, and individuals that you're trying to reach. Most governments and organizations have some kind of directory online with email contact information. Give it a shot. Try to engage with them directly. Also consider any upcoming events or key dates that you can capitalize on for additional promotion and engagement. This is the last example of a policy brief that I'll share. It's one that I worked on earlier this year for Data 2X and Walking the Talk. In this case, we used a standardized design template developed by Data 2X. For dissemination, we posted the brief on both of the organization's websites. We also developed several social media graphics to promote the brief online. This included creating a spreadsheet with partners' social media handles, agreed upon text and key messages, relevant hashtags, and calendar launch dates. This brief targeted policymakers in government, more specifically those working in foreign affairs ministries responsible for developing and implementing feminist foreign policies. Its development and launch was strategically coordinated to coincide with the third ministerial conference on feminist foreign policy that took place in Mexico this summer. We knew that our target audience would be gathered there, creating a prime opportunity to engage with them and share our policy recommendations. Partners who attended the conference, from Data2X and Walking the Talk, they promoted the brief through word of mouth. They also printed out hard copies to distribute to key stakeholders and shared QR codes that attendees could scan in order to download the brief. I think this is a really great example of leveraging a specific event as part of your dissemination strategy alongside online promotion. I want to end by sharing some feminist communication and design considerations to keep in mind when developing policy briefs, especially those on important topics related to women, peace, and security. First, ensure that the contents of your brief reflect the lived experiences and impact of policy issues for women and other marginalized or underrepresented groups. Take care to use inclusive language that recognizes and represents diverse genders and identities. Focus on the intersectional nature of identities and inequalities in both the analysis and communication of research findings and in the development of policy recommendations. On that same note, provide actionable recommendations that promote gender equality and social justice. Design the brief to be accessible to people with different abilities, including using clear fonts, sufficient contrast, and alternative text for images for those with visual disabilities. Use images that highlight the agency of women and other marginalized or underrepresented groups, and avoid using images that reinforce essentialist, patriarchal, or colonial representations and stereotypes. Finally, properly acknowledge any partners that contributed to the research and development of your policy brief, paying special attention to smaller and Global South-based partners who may hold less power in the research process. I really hope that you've enjoyed this video and that it helps you to develop and communicate policy briefs more effectively. Links for all of the examples that I shared today are provided in the video description below. For more information or to get in touch, you can find us online at www.femdev.ca.